Here's Dennis Prager to explain why you should believe in an afterlife.
Is there an afterlife? Life after this life ends?
No.
There probably isn't a human being who hasn't asked this question at one time or another. And here's the answer. If there is a God, there is an afterlife.
That doesn't logically follow. Why can't it be the case that there's a God, but we all just stop existing when we die?
It's that simple. And here's why. First, this life is filled with an immeasurable amount of injustice and suffering. The only way there can be some ultimate justice for victims of evil is if there is an afterlife. And the only way comfort is available to those who suffer unjustly, from painful disease and premature death to the death of a child, is if there is an afterlife. But such an afterlife exists only if there is a good and just God.
That doesn't follow either. Why can't there be an afterlife without a God? Maybe karma exists. Probably not, but the point is, if karma did exist to deliver retribution or rewards, either in one's lifetime or in reincarnation, then there wouldn't need to be a God to do it. Maybe there's no God, but karma promotes you to a better life after the one you're living if you're a good person. No God necessary.
A good and just God provides a way to compensate for all the unjust suffering in this world.
Why would a good and just God allow unjust suffering in the first place? I know the standard apologist answer is because he wants us to have free will, but why is having free will worth the suffering that exists? That seems like a bad deal to me. I'd rather be morally infallible but not free than be free to do immoral things.
Second, since God is not physical, the physical world is not the only reality.
What's the alternative? If something isn't physical, then what is it?
There is also a non-physical reality. And we humans have a part of us which, being non-physical, survives the death of our body. We call it the soul.
You mean a ghost? You believe in ghosts, do you? What is a soul exactly? What is it made out of? How does it interact with a physical body? If it is our soul that does all of our thinking and feeling, then why do we have brains? And how is it that altering the brain, either surgically or chemically, alters our thinking and feeling? How does changing the brain physically cause changes in our supposedly non-physical souls, if such souls exist? It seems to me like it makes more sense to infer that our minds, our thoughts and feelings, are events carried out by our brains. That's the simplest inference in that it doesn't assume the existence of any additional entity. And it seems much more coherent. It doesn't posit the existence of anything non-physical, whatever that's even supposed to mean, nor that such a thing somehow interacts with and is altered by that which is physical. If our minds are events carried out by our brains, then the idea of a ghost or an afterlife is self-contradictory. It is essentially the idea that the mind, an event carried out by the brain, can be carried out without a brain, or anything for that matter.
But if there is no God, this physical life is all there is.
That also doesn't follow. Even if God is non-physical, why does he need to exist in order for anything else non-physical to exist? If souls exist, why can't they exist without a God?
So, no God, no soul, no afterlife.
Well, I guess that depends on what you count as an afterlife. Many Jews during Jesus' time believed in what's called apocalypticism, which is the idea that when you die, it's like going to sleep, except you presumably don't dream, and on Judgment Day, everyone who is good is brought back to life bodily, and everyone who is bad stays dead forever. That's a conception of the afterlife that doesn't seem to need a soul to exist.
Now, of course, those who doubt God's existence have every reason to doubt an afterlife. But if you believe in a good God, then you have to believe there's an afterlife.
If you can see the amount of suffering that exists on the planet, there's no reason to believe in a good God, not one which is all-powerful anyway. A good, all-powerful God wouldn't let billions suffer and then make it up to them later. A good, all-powerful God would prevent anyone from suffering in the first place.
If you say you believe in God but not in an afterlife, the God you believe in is not only not good, that God is cruel. That God made a world filled with unjust suffering and just left it at that.
And even if you do believe in an afterlife, you believe in a God which created a world full of unjust suffering and just left an IOU to make it up to you after you die. If you're obedient, that is. Such a God is either not perfectly good or not all-powerful.
Now, some people who don't believe in an afterlife offer their own version of immortality. I once attended a funeral where the man officiating said, "While there is no afterlife, we do live on, through our good works and in the memories of loved ones." That's what a lot of people who reject an afterlife want to believe. But the idea that human beings live on through their good works or through the memories of loved ones, which generally means a person's children or grandchildren, is simply meaningless. If people live on through their good works, then children who die don't live on. The number of good works most children are even capable of is minuscule. As for babies who die, well, babies can't engage in good works at all, so I guess they just don't live on.
What's this argument intended to prove? While the idea that some people die and are quickly forgotten may be bleak, that doesn't mean it isn't true. To argue otherwise is to employ the fallacy of argumentum ad consequentiam. Just because you may not like the idea that you will eventually be forgotten after you die doesn't mean that you must, therefore, survive forever somehow.
Anyway, the truth is that bad works usually live on longer than nearly any good works.
How could you possibly measure that objectively?
As for living on in the memories of our children, what do we say to those who have no children? Sorry, you don't live on. Moreover, living on in anyone's memory, as beautiful as that is not the same as immortality or an afterlife.
So what? Your argument seems to be the idea of the afterlife is nicer than the idea of there not being an afterlife, therefore there probably is an afterlife. That's nonsense.
As Woody Allen put it, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. If there's no afterlife, we don't live on. Period. Let's be honest enough to acknowledge that. If there's no afterlife, none of us will ever again be with those we most love and who love us. If there's no afterlife, neither anyone murdered nor any murderer will ever receive ultimate justice. If there's no afterlife, this life, for the vast majority of people who ever lived and for those alive now, is a meaningless crapshoot.
What do you mean by meaningless? If you mean that your life may be of no consequence, so what? If the meaning of life is to fulfill some purpose a God has in mind, why should I care? Even if there is a God, I don't see why I should care about what his purposes for me are, or why I should feel better about my life because he imposed a purpose on me. I often hear from apologists that our purpose is to glorify God. Why should I want to do that? If that's the meaning of life, I see no reason to care.
Finally, people always ask me, so what happens in the afterlife? To which I can only respond, I don't know.
Then how do you know it provides ultimate justice? Why do you argue that it accomplishes this if you don't know what happens to people after they die?
But I do know this. My belief in God and the afterlife keeps me sane.
How? If you don't know what happens, how is it of any comfort to you at all? How could the prospect of an afterlife maintain your sanity if you don't know what it actually entails?
The thought that this life is all there is means that torturers get away with the horrors they have engaged in.
If you don't know what happens in the afterlife, then you don't know that they're going to be punished.
It means that this life is random and pointless.
Why would it be preferable that there be a God that put us here for the sole purpose of singing his praises? How is that better than randomness and pointlessness?
And it means that I will never again see anyone I love. This would drive me mad.
If you don't know what happens in the afterlife, then how do you know you'll see your dead friends again?
In fact, I don't see how it wouldn't drive anyone mad who cares about suffering and who loves anyone. So is there an afterlife? If there is a God, of course there is.
Again, that's a non sequitur. Even if there is a God, any God that would put us on a planet of suffering is either not perfectly good or not all-powerful, even if he did promise to make it up to us in the afterlife. And since we can know for sure that if there is a God, he is either not a perfectly good one or not an all-powerful one, we have no reason to believe he has both enough goodness and enough power to sufficiently make it up to us. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.